Evan Carver first noticed the man in the black cap on a rainy Tuesday night, standing perfectly still at the far end of the street, his head tilted just enough to suggest a smile. By the next evening, the man wasn't outside anymore, he was inside Evan's apartment. It started with the feeling that someone was always behind me, not right on my heels, not close enough to hear footsteps, but they're lingering in that strange invisible space where you can see them but you can sense them. At first I dismissed it. Maybe it was just my mind reacting to the quiet of late evenings after work, when the streets were dim and mostly empty. But the sensation never went away. If anything, it began to grow sharper, heavier, like a weight pressing down on the back of my neck. I couldn't explain it. I would glance over my shoulder and see nothing, yet the hairs on my arms would rise as if something unseen had just moved out of sight. Over the next week I began to notice small details that made the feeling harder to ignore. The same figure appearing in different places. A tall man, dressed in dark clothing, face hidden under the shadow of a cap. Never close enough for me to make out his features, but always angled just so like he wasn't trying to approach, only watch. Once, while walking home, I spotted him leaning against a street lamp across the road. I kept walking, telling myself not to look again, but curiosity got the better of me. I turned my head a few seconds later and he was gone. No sound of footsteps retreating, no sign of movement. It was as if he had simply melted into the night. After that, I became hyper-aware of my surroundings. I started checking shop windows for reflections as I passed, and sometimes I caught him there too, standing half-hidden in an alleyway or leaning in the shadows near a bus stop, watching me. It never looked like he was following directly. He was always just far enough to make it seem like coincidence, but the frequency was too much to ignore. I never saw him speak to anyone or even move much, just that constant, fixed attention. At night, the feeling didn't go away. My apartment, once my safe space, started to feel unfamiliar. I would come home and notice the blinds slightly open when I was sure I had closed them. My kitchen chair pushed just a little out of place. A stack of papers shifted. At first I blamed my own carelessness. Maybe I was just tired and forgetting, but then the changes became too precise, too deliberate, like someone had been inside and wanted me to notice, just not enough to have proof. One night I woke up to the faint sound of creaking that was coming from the hallway outside my door. My building wasn't new. It made noises sometimes, but this was different, slow, careful, as if someone was trying not to be heard. I sat up in bed, holding my breath, straining to listen. The sound stopped. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, thinking I might call someone, but the screen lit up before I could unlock it. A notification had appeared. An unknown number had sent me a photo. My stomach tightened as I opened it. It was a picture of me, taken from inside my bedroom, while I was sleeping. The blanket was pulled halfway down, my face clearly visible in the dim glow of my bedside lamp. I froze, my phone almost slipped from my hands. I scanned the room in panic, eyes darting to every shadowed corner, every inch of space. I checked the closet, the bathroom, under the bed, nothing. But the thought that someone had been in my room, close enough to take that picture, was unbearable. I locked my door and sat with my back against it for the rest of the night, gripping my phone so hard my knuckles hurt. The apartment was silent again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had sent that photo was still here, watching, waiting. And somewhere in that silence, I realized something far worse than the picture itself. The bedroom window, which I had locked before sleeping, was now standing slightly open. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I stayed on the floor with my back pressed against the door, my eyes fixed on the shadowy shapes of my furniture in the dim light. Every little sound made my skin crawl. The low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen sounded like a distant growl. The old wooden floor creaked now and then, and each time my body tensed as if preparing to run. Even the faint ticking of the clock on the wall seemed too loud, each second dragging me further into an unbearable state of alertness. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I began to hear something else: soft, measured breathing. It wasn't the rhythm of my own breath, which was shaky and uneven. This was slow, deliberate, and terrifyingly close. I held my breath, straining to tell if it was coming from inside the apartment or beyond the door. It stopped before I could be sure, but it left my body rigid, my mind replaying the sound over and over. When the sun finally rose, I forced myself to get up. The window was still cracked open, and the air that seeped in was cold and damp. I closed and locked it, checking it twice, then checked the front door lock 3 times before leaving for work. Every movement felt mechanical, as if I were running on some desperate instinct to keep going, to pretend nothing had changed. On the bus, I kept my head low but scanned the passengers in quick glances. The world felt hostile, each stranger a possible threat. I almost convinced myself it was fine until I saw him sitting at the very back of the bus, the same man I'd seen on the streets, dark clothing, cap pulled low. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking. Even from a distance, I could feel his attention like a cold hand resting on my spine. I looked away, heart racing, and rang the bell to get off. I stepped onto the sidewalk 2 stops early, blending into the crowd in hopes of shaking him. I glanced over my shoulder as I turned down a side street, but the space behind me was empty. Still, I felt watched. That night, my apartment felt colder than usual. The moment I opened the door, I noticed a smell-stale cigarette smoke. I didn't smoke, and no one I knew had been over in weeks. I moved through the rooms slowly, checking each one, but everything seemed in place. It was only in the bathroom that I noticed something wrong. My toothbrush was wet, as if it had just been used. The bristles were bent in a way they hadn't been that morning. The sight made my skin crawl. I couldn't prove someone had been inside, but the evidence was right there. My heart hammered as I checked every lock again, pulling the chain tight on the door. I left the bathroom light on that night, a dim glow spilling into the living room as I lay on the couch, phone in hand. At some point, I drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep. When I woke, the TV was off, even though I had left it on for background noise. The room was too quiet, the kind of silence that feels unnatural, as if something has swallowed up all the ordinary sounds. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and that's when I saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the couch, tall and unmoving. I couldn't see the face, just the outline of a person, black against the faint light from the bathroom. My breath caught in my throat. For what felt like an eternity, neither of us moved. Then, in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. The bathroom light still glowed, but the open doorway felt darker somehow, as if something had passed through it. I stayed frozen in place, too afraid to move, listening to the creaks of the building and the faint hum of the refrigerator returning, as though nothing had happened. But the smell of cigarettes was stronger now. I moved my mattress into the living room the next morning. The thought of sleeping in my bedroom made my skin crawl. I couldn't bear the idea of being surrounded by 4 walls and a single door, not after seeing that figure standing over me. Out here, I told myself, I would have a better chance of hearing someone coming. I kept the blinds closed, the lights on, and my phone in my hand at all times. Still, the feeling that I wasn't alone in the apartment clung to me like a second skin. The air inside seemed heavier, as if the space itself was holding something I couldn't see. The silence was different now, thicker, weighted, broken only by the occasional sound from the building. My paranoia deepened when, later that day, I heard faint scratching coming from behind the hallway closet door. It wasn't constant, just a slow, irregular sound, like fingernails dragging along wood. I tried to convince myself it was mice or something mechanical, but deep down, I didn't believe it. On the third night of sleeping in the living room, I found a note slipped under my front door. The paper was cheap and torn from something else, the handwriting jagged and uneven. It said only one thing: "You look better when you're scared." My hands shook as I read it. The words felt almost casual, like they had been written by someone who knew exactly how much space they had in my head and wanted to take more. I locked the door again, slid the chain into place, and pushed a heavy chair in front of it. Then I installed a cheap camera I'd bought earlier that day, one of those tiny devices with a blinking red light to face the living room. I thought if I could catch something on video, I might be able to prove to myself that all of this was real. That night I barely slept. I woke every hour to check the feed on my phone, each time finding only still images of myself tossing and turning. But when I reviewed the footage the next morning, I felt my stomach twist. The recording showed me lying on the mattress in the middle of the living room for the first few hours. Nothing happened. Then, around 3:12 a.m., the dark hallway closet door opened just slightly. A tall shape emerged slowly, moving with a stiffness that made my chest tighten. It stood motionless in the doorway for several seconds before stepping into the living room. The figure stayed in the far corner, barely visible in the shadows, and then tilted its head to one side in a slow, unnatural motion. The timestamp showed that it remained there for over an hour. It didn't move closer, didn't make a sound, just watched. In the final few seconds before the recording ended, the figure turned directly toward the camera. Even though its face was obscured in darkness, I could see the curve of its mouth forming a wide, deliberate smile. I slammed the laptop shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might pass out. I didn't know what terrified me more, for the fact that someone had been inside my apartment for hours, or that they had been so close without me ever waking. The rest of the day was a blur of pacing, checking locks, and peering through the peephole every few minutes. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That a shadowy figure I couldn't clearly describe was breaking in and watching me. That my only proof was grainy footage that could just as easily be dismissed as a trick of light. That night, I didn't bother trying to sleep. I sat in the armchair facing the hallway, the kitchen knife balanced across my lap. Every so often, I thought I heard faint movement from inside the closet again, but I didn't get up to check. I couldn't. Somewhere past midnight, I noticed something on the floor near the closet door, a small, folded scrap of paper that hadn't been there earlier. My hands felt cold as I reached for it. Inside, written in the same jagged handwriting as before, were 3 words: "Check the footage." I didn't want to check the footage. Every part of me resisted the idea, but curiosity and dread tangled together until I couldn't stop myself. My hands were unsteady as I opened the camera app on my phone and began scrolling back through the previous night's recording. For the first hour, nothing happened, just me sitting in the armchair, occasionally shifting or rubbing my eyes. Then, at 1:47 a.m., something moved in the far corner of the hallway. The closet door, which I had blocked with a chair before settling in for the night, began to shake very slightly. At first it was subtle, just enough to rattle against the doorframe, then it stopped. Minutes passed. My recorded self sat motionless, oblivious. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the chair began to slide away from the door. The scraping sound was faint on the audio, but it was there, long, drawn out, deliberate. The closet door creaked open, and the same tall figure emerged. It didn't step forward right away. Instead, it stayed in the shadows, had tilted at that same unsettling angle, watching me in the armchair. The footage showed it standing there for several minutes, just breathing, though the sound was barely audible. A slow, deep inhale followed by an equally slow exhale. Then, without warning, it stepped forward and crouched beside the mattress I'd dragged into the living room. It reached out one long arm and touched the blanket, smoothing it down gently, almost affectionately, before looking directly at me. The worst part was that I didn't react at all in the footage. I didn't wake up. I just sat there, eyes half closed as though I couldn't see it even though it was right there. My skin prickled as I watched it move toward the camera, leaning so close that only the lower half of its face was visible. The mouth was stretched in a smile far too wide to be natural. The recording cut out right after that. I turned off the phone, shoved it under a pillow, and sat perfectly still in the armchair. My breathing was shallow, my body tense. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to give away that I'd seen what was on that footage. Whoever or whatever that was, if it was still here, I didn't want it to know I was aware. The hours that followed were slow and suffocating. I heard faint knocks on the walls, sometimes behind the kitchen cabinets, sometimes near the baseboards. They were spaced far apart, as if someone was testing each surface for a weak point. At one point, I could have sworn I heard something crawling inside the walls, like deliberate movement, not random scurrying like an animal. I piled more furniture in front of the closet door and wedged a chair under the front doorknob. I told myself that if I could just make it through one more night, I'd leave in the morning and never come back. But that night, the sounds were louder. The knocking grew into soft, deliberate footsteps. I heard them move from the kitchen to the hallway, stopping just outside the living room. I gripped the knife tighter, my hand damp with sweat. The footsteps didn't retreat. They stayed there, on the other side of the wall, for what felt like hours. When I finally worked up the courage to glance at the camera feed, there was nothing, no movement, no figure. But something was different. The bedroom door, which I knew I had shut earlier, was now standing wide open. The sight sent a jolt through me. I stared at the screen, my pulse thundering, when I heard it breathing again. This time, it was unmistakable. Slow, heavy, and right behind me. The sound was so close that I could feel the air move along the back of my neck. My shoulders locked in place, every nerve screaming at me to run, but I stayed frozen, terrified that turning around would confirm what I already knew. And then, just like before, the breathing stopped. I sat there for what felt like hours, frozen in the armchair, waiting for something, anything to happen. The silence that followed the breathing was worse than the sound itself. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe it had slipped away again, retreating into some hidden corner I hadn't found. Or maybe it was still there, inches away, waiting for me to turn my head. Every muscle in my body ached from the tension, but I didn't dare move. Eventually I forced myself to look. I turned slowly, inch by inch, until I was facing the space behind me. It was empty. No figure, no movement, no sign that anyone had been there at all. My relief was thin, fragile, and it shattered almost immediately when I noticed something strange. The camera feed on my phone had changed. Instead of showing the fixed view of the living room, it now displayed a live angle of me from behind, exactly the same position I'd been sitting in a moment ago. The problem was, the camera wasn't behind me. I spun in my seat, searching for where the new shot could be coming from. But there was nothing, no second device, no hidden phone. The feed was coming from somewhere inside the apartment, but I couldn't figure out where. I stood up, my chest tightening, and began searching every inch of the room. I checked under the couch, behind the TV, inside the cabinets. Nothing. I moved to the kitchen, scanning the shelves, even pulling open the drawers in case a small hidden camera had been placed there. Still nothing. The feed kept following me, shifting angles without me touching anything, as though someone was filming in real time from just out of sight. My phone buzzed, pulling my attention to the screen. A new message from the same unknown number appeared. My stomach knotted as I opened it. It was a photo of my own, I'd taken up close, detailed enough to see every tiny reflection in it. The timestamp showed it had been taken less than a minute ago. I dropped the phone and stumbled back, my breath coming fast and shallow. Every part of me screamed to get out. I grabbed my coat, my keys, and ran to the front door. My hands fumbled with the locks, the chain rattling loudly as I pulled it free. But when I tried to turn the knob, it wouldn't budge. It was as if something on the other side was holding it shut. I hit the door with my shoulder, once, twice, but it didn't move. Then, from somewhere deep in the apartment, I heard a sound, slow, deliberate footsteps approaching. They weren't rushed. They weren't trying to hide. Whoever it was knew I couldn't leave. I backed away from the door, my eyes darting toward the hallway. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just beyond the wall separating me from the dark corridor. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The message was short. Don't bother looking. I've always been here. As I read the words, a floorboard in the hallway let out a long, drawn-out creak. My gaze locked on the shadowed opening that led toward the bedroom. I didn't see anyone step through, but the darkness there seemed to thicken, almost pulse, as if something was moving within it. The air grew colder. My breath began to fog in front of me, each exhale shaky and uneven. I could feel it again, that presence pressing in from all sides, filling the room. My grip tightened around the knife in my hand, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. Something shifted in the shadows, and I caught the faintest glimmer of teeth, a wide, unnatural smile. Then, without a sound, the darkness seemed to fold inward, swallowing the shape entirely. The room was empty again, but the camera feed on my phone didn't agree. It still showed me standing there, frozen in the living room. Except now there was a figure right behind me, leaning close enough that its face nearly touched mine, and in the reflection of its eyes, I saw something I will never forget: my own bedroom, with a window open, and me asleep inside.